we're going to start, minus the bell. But I think I'm loud enough. I just would like to welcome everybody here. We have a really nice turnout and great to have Rachel and Kim here. It's very nice to have you here. And so we're going to start by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. If you will please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll sing God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Okay. Ken? Ken, do we have words of inspiration? Okay.
Okay, I have two quotes I wanted to share with you today. One, I'm not going to tell you who said it until I'm done saying it, and you can conjecture a little bit in your mind, see if you can figure it out. It says, "We are like tenant farmers chopping down the fence around our house for fuel when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide. I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that." Any ideas as to who that might be that would say that?
Al Gore. John Kerry.
No, it goes much farther back. That was Thomas Edison
Oh, my
said
goodness.
that. Isn't that incredible? And he died in 1931,
Wow.
so I'm not sure when the quote was. So quite a ways back. A lot of foresight there. The other one, I want to ask you not to close your eyes, but to kind of get in the mood, of thinking of what the feelings are you have when I read this, and think about what it can do to make your feelings good as you go forward. Okay, it says, "Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into roses." Think of that. "The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop away from you like the leaves of autumn." Isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm. And just think of how important that is, that our natural environment does for us. We're human animals, and we were made to be in nature, and we can get so much from being in there. And that's a quote from John Muir, which is not surprising, of course.
All right. Ken, do you want to introduce our speaker?
Okay. Okay. Well, we only get a few times to invite guests, each of us. And November, I'd like to do each year because I'm here, which is instead of being in Washington. And also, I always think of John Kennedy, who was so interested in the environment and always gave his talks related to that. And Fran was planning to come today, as she did at the last meeting. But her son, Michael, who was one of our members earlier, you may remember Michael Kennedy, perhaps. And he had a burst appendix apparently on Sunday, so she was going to be visiting there today, and she said to send her regards, and she was so grateful that we were honoring John by having these talks. So that's just a little background. Okay, well, our speaker today is Rachel Hogan Carr, and with her is Kim Kmetz, both from Nurture Nature. That's one of our outstanding organizations in town here, and we're so glad that they're here. Rachel has so much written on her webpage that she has done that it's very hard to sort through and decide what to say about her, but I'll try to hit a few nuggets anyhow. First of all, in terms of education, she graduated from Moravian College, now Moravian University, and she studied at Penn State University, and she was editor-in-chief of the Daily Collegian there. Then she got her MA in Environmental Policy and Design from Lehigh University, so she's gone to some of our really fine universities here in the Lehigh Valley. She's executive director of Nurture Nature Center since its inception, and she actually helped to conceive the idea for it. In addition to her leadership responsibilities, she's been in charge of carrying out many of Nurture Nature's important grant work, and I'll just mention a few because there are so many. She led the Flood Safety Education and Awareness Campaign in the Delaware River Basin, in conjunction with what is NOAA, N-O-A-A, the National Oceanic, thank you.
Mouthful, I trip every time.
There you go, thank you. And Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Bureau. She was the principal investigator on 2 social science research studies funded by NOAA involving flood risk and the fact that some people don't follow the advice when they're given warnings, and trying to figure out why was that and what could they do to increase the response for it. She's also managed a project with FEMA and the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for coastal flood research. And she's worked with the Easton Environmental Advisory Council, the National Weather Service, State College Weather Forecast Office, New Jersey Coastal Outreach Advisory Team, the National Weather Service assessment team for the 2015 North and South Carolina floods. I don't know how she gets home to have dinner at night. And she's not only involved with these things, but she's always been an important community person. She's involved with the Easton Hunger Coalition, the Easton Community Partners Forums, a member of the Carl Sterner Arts Trail Board of Governance, the Downtown Neighborhood Association in Easton, as co-founder and leader of the board of directors for the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor. So she's a lot of things that she's been involved with, and she's still involved in an absolutely terrific organization, Nurture Nature Center, and they have lots of big plans. So she's going to be talking to us first about the topic that you saw, global change, local impacts, understanding environmental issues in the Lehigh Valley. And I asked her if she'd also just give us a brief rundown on what's happening there that's so exciting right now with their new building program. So Rachel, and
Great. Thank you so
we
much.
welcome you.
Thank you. I won't make you look at really small things, though. I'll try not to. But hi, my name is Rachel Hogan Carr. Thank you for a very generous introduction. I am born and raised in Easton and know some of you from work that I've done in the community for a long time, having worked at also other nonprofit organizations here in the past. At Project of Easton, doing community organizing work is where I met some of you a long, long time ago. So it's great to be here and talking about the work that we care about most at Nurture Nature Center. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Nurture Nature Center, we're at 518 Northampton Street in downtown Easton. You can't come today because we're closed for construction, which is really exciting, and I'll talk about that later. But if you were to come, you would see this fabulous exhibit called Science on a Sphere, a 6-foot globe that shows Earth and space science programs about a wide range of environmental issues. And I'll be talking about some of the issues that are facing us here in the Lehigh Valley right now, some of which we're tending to actively and some of which we're beginning to think about. Our mission as an organization is to build community resiliency to environmental risks. We want to make people engaged and excited stewards of their local environment, and we do this through science, art, and community dialogue programming. So if you come to our center, you're You're going to find 4 art galleries. You're going to find rotating art exhibits and arts workshops. You're going to find science presentations and science exhibits, science programs, and lots of community events as well. And so you can see some of the images of our space here, and see we have workshops and forums and field trips when we're open, and all kinds of children coming through and adults, some beautiful programming, live programming. One of the things we also do that was just mentioned is social science research. So we've worked closely since 2012, so about 13 years now, with National Weather Service doing social science research studies across the country. We've done about 100 focus groups now with about 1,000 participants in communities across the country that flood, and talk with the residents and professionals there about how they receive and understand flood forecast information. We've also been funded by some major federal organizations like NASA and NOAA and National Science Foundation to create education models for teaching science to young people in various ways, and we've disseminated those across the country. And we help Easton with its climate action plan and drafting that plan and activating it. So we work at multiple spheres in our work here. And this is a little bit, I won't make you look at all of those, but you can see we have science and art program, community discussion. We do space and astronomy programs, so if we have any space lovers here in this group. Teacher professional development, lots of student internships. We have some neat programs too, like watershed friendly certification program for those of you who care for your properties carefully and think about stormwater and the natural species around you. You can get your property certified as being watershed friendly. You get a beautiful sign, you go onto our website, take a test. This is in partnership with Penn State Extension, and take a survey of how you manage your land, and if you score high enough you can become certified and show your neighbors that you're really taking care of your property. And that program is a statewide program expanding across many kinds of properties now and expanding. So we do all kinds of activities here, all really aiming to encourage engaged and inspired stewardship and build resilience to the environmental risks facing us. And for those of you, I think most of you here, many of you here have lived in the Lehigh Valley a long time. And so the topics that I'm going to mention will probably be familiar to you because the geography and hydrology of our landscape means that we've had some persistent risks for long periods of time. Nurture Nature was formed in response to flooding in the basin in 2004, 2005, and 2006, and that is probably our #1 hazard that we face from a natural hazard perspective here in the Lehigh Valley, here in Easton, and increasingly here in Forks Township when Zucksville Road and all these roads close every time it rains now. And so it was not just the 1955 flood. Does anybody have a personal experience with the 1955 flood? All right, great. Awesome.
I was embarrassed.
You were, yeah, really? Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh wow. I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but it's amazing to hear these stories. You know, if you come to Nurture Nature, we have exhibits about the 1955 flood on our wall. But then, of course, it happened. Yeah. So the 2004, 5, and 6 floods were way less than that, right? But they were dramatic nonetheless. They were very dramatic. They were far less than that. But everybody was shocked that it could happen in 2004, 5, and 6 because it hadn't happened in a while. So it hasn't happened since 2006, really. We've had some, interim events. But now, 20 years later, I notice that we're already forgetting that it could happen again at any moment, right? And that's sort of what the role that Nurture Nature Center is trying to play. So some of the most flood-prone properties in Easton now are apartment buildings, Confluence and Watermark. Those were areas, and so we have to keep reminding ourselves that these are persistent risks that we face. And it's not just the major events. Now, increasingly, with increased precipitation rates from climate change, we're having rapid flash floods, and we have many more paved surfaces near roads and homes in places that used to be farmland, and suddenly roads are flooding all the time. And so flooding becomes not just the major events of 1955 and 4, 5, and 6, but a persistent risk. And people wash away, and there's serious damage that comes even with these smaller events. So that's one of the issues that we particularly stay on top of caring about. It's kind of central to our mission. Air quality in the Lehigh Valley is very poor. Generally speaking, persistent. This has been going on for a very long time. Our overall grade for air quality increased last year as assessed by the State of the Air report from the American Lung Association. But our grade for particulate pollution in particular dropped down to an F. So we get an F for particle pollution, and particle pollution, PM.25, is the stuff that sticks in your lungs and causes respiratory trouble and makes it difficult when we get those code orange days to go outside and you get told to stay inside. Well, that's where the Lehigh Valley is faring fairly poorly, and it has a lot to do with the shape of our landscape, the fact that we are a valley. Traps particulate pollution in particularly more, but it also has to do with our land development patterns and the amount of traffic that we're bringing, and I will touch on that. And increasingly, extreme heat events. And this is an increasing risk in communities across the country and frankly globally. And the small shifts in global temperature that we're having can cause wild extreme swings in daily temperature, so that we are noticing and experiencing many more extended heat waves. And this is causing a lot of challenges for our emergency response and how to handle that, because we aren't particularly prepared for that. So diving into to some of these a little bit more, the flooding problem, if any of you are interested in flooding risk, there's a great organization called First Street Foundation, which has mapping tools that give very in-depth flood maps for properties, specific to properties, and reports and assessments. And they're doing, don't tell FEMA, but they're doing better quality mapping than FEMA is. You have to pay for it to buy some of them. Some of the resources are free, but some are better. But they're really, the thing that they're doing differently as well is they're mapping not just risk based on historic patterns, but also accounting for future risk. And so FEMA maps have always been based on where it has flooded before, but they don't account for where it could flood in the future. And so First Street Foundation is showing us a forward-looking risk profile. And it's a really interesting website. It's really nicely done. This is a screenshot from one of their reports. You can read the report and download it for free on their website if you just put First Street Foundation in. And what this is saying here, generally speaking, is that they have a precipitation model. They're calling the First Street Foundation precipitation model. And their model is showing the U.S. will experience more occurrences of extreme precipitation, i.e. heavy rainfall, and that the recent experience of catastrophic events over the last few decades should be treated as the new normal for many areas. So Texas, Asheville, all of these places that are getting flooded that have not been flooded before or have been and not in any category, the common projections are that this will become normal and not the freak flood that everybody wants to always kind of take the outlier event, you know. Actually, my master's program at Lehigh University, that's part of what I actually did, is kind of Google terms like that and find a preponderance of responses. If you put in fluke flood or freak flood, of mayors across the country saying, oh, that was a fluke event, we're going to come back stronger and better. It's not a fluke event. It's a scientifically founded up, you know, a thing that we should expect to happen. And when we treat it as that, it's not. So this is really the new normal. What you see here, this intense blue over here, is the change in return period, which means the frequency, the recurrence interval of major floods. And you see our areas in the deepest dark blue. Without going into detail, it means we are going to be getting more frequent high impact rainfall events, which will lead to flooding. So the way that the climate change world has kind of shorthanded the generalized forecast for impacts is that dry areas will get drier and wet areas will get wetter. So if you're in a very dry area, you could get some floods, but more likely you're going to really dry out. We are in a wet area, so we should expect more. And it's a blessing and a curse, because we don't ever worry too much about our water supply here. We can turn on our faucets and run forever because we are just got water flowing everywhere. But when it rains too much, we don't love it anymore. So at a more local level, there is something called the Lehigh Valley Hazard Mitigation Plan, which is developed by both counties. Northampton and Lehigh County together work on this. It's run through their emergency management departments, and it's a requirement of PEMA, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, requires them to have this plan in order to get funding. And PEMA must have a hazard mitigation plan per FEMA in order for them to get money. So these are required documents that are regulatory documents. We've used them at Nurture Nature as the basis for education programs. But basically, every municipality in the Lehigh Valley, there's 67 of them, has to detail its experiences with all of the range of hazards ice, landslides, sinkholes, radon, invasive species, including man-made threats as well, and hazards. And they document the history of when they happened, their risk profiles. They put this all together into a large, pretty interesting report if you're nerdy like me. And flooding is the top hazard in the Lehigh Valley Hazard Mitigation Plan writ large across all 67 communities. I'm throwing things. I'm sorry. And if you go, there's lots of places to look for this data so long as the federal government keeps it up. The website's live, but right now the NOAA Storm Event Database, which is really interesting. I just put in some, grabbed some dates and some calculations, and they show that Northampton County has had 35 flood events, about $55 million in damage that has been reported since 2000. Lehigh County has another 35 million in that same period. Theirs look a lot like flash floods, which means smaller rivers and creeks generally. But it's very, very expensive, and those numbers are certainly underreported because they only represent some of the major events, not some of the minor ones. So First Street Foundation says that within our county here, we have 20,000 properties in Northampton County that have risk of flooding over the next 30 years, and that's 16% of all properties in Northampton County. And so you can see this chart here is showing that there's severe risk in particular to commercial structures, which is interesting, and I'd like to find out what exactly that's stemming from. There's major risk to infrastructure, severe to social, severe to roads, which we're seeing, and a moderate risk level by their assessment to residential properties. And so, we're looking at this at the very, very local level. Globally, this is one of the biggest issues environmentally that is being addressed. The World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations, in particular, the head of the United Nations issued a call for early warnings for all by 2027. We're almost there. And so Early Warnings for All is an initiative that's trying to get early flood warning systems and hazard warning systems to every country around the globe by 2027. Because periodically you turn on the news and you hear that Pakistan or some country somewhere in the world just had massive flooding, and the numbers of people that die make your head spin, and you think, what do you mean 4,500 people just died in a flood, right? How could this be? And it is because not every country has infrastructure to warn people the way that we take for granted. In the United States, where I study, we have tons of infrastructure to warn us of flooding. We have excellent flood forecasts, and people still die because they don't receive the forecast, because they don't believe the forecast, because they don't understand the forecast, and because they drive around the road barriers where it says, turn around, don't drown, don't drive here. People drive, it happens all the time. People just drive right around the cone and they're like, I got a truck. Right? So there's 1,000 barriers to us for making better planning decisions. And Nurture Nature Center is involved with this process. I chair an international group called INPRA, which stands for Integrating Precipitation and Hydrology for Early Action. It's an international group of researchers from about 12 different countries around the world with different disciplines trying to improve hydrologic forecasting and warning communication. And it's a pretty exciting operation. Recently, our research team, not me, but the other members of our research team published a paper on global flood early warning systems that kind of catalogs the entire movement worldwide. So that was a major paper that just came out. So at the local level, at the global level, the issues pertain, how we address them requires being knowledgeable about what's happening in the rest of the world. And I had mentioned air quality, and I'd mentioned that Northampton County got an F rating for particulate pollution. Mm-hmm. This is particularly harmful for cardiovascular health. We have really high asthma rates in the Lehigh Valley, very, very high. I was recently at that lab, I think it's called HNL Lab on 25th Street across from Taco Bell that used to be Myers Bakery. Mm-hmm. I had to go get blood work there, and as I sat in the waiting room, they have a TV, and it said that the Lehigh Valley was first or second in the country. Has somebody else seen this? For ER visits for asthma?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I was like, I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was so bad. So our air quality, which has, huge impacts on school attendance and all kinds of things, right? That's one of the ways that asthma really affects people is kids miss so much school from it. And so it really requires a lot of attention from us. there's some research going on in the Lehigh Valley. There's an initiative called Lehigh Valley Breathes that's run by a professor at Lehigh University. Her name is Brina Holland. I know her because she was my thesis advisor on the flooding work I did when I was going to master's program. But she's installing purple air monitors, which are residential monitors that you can buy. You can just order one and you put it on, and they feed into a larger system, and they're measuring particulate counts and trying to understand a little bit better how your distance from a highway, your distance from a warehouse center, your location in a rural community, how this affects things. One of the bleak things, there's some good news that's happening. Some things have been made better. B. Braun had some potentially, some things that were going on there that are better. They put new controls in and air is better. One of the sad things is when I, study her presentations and talk with her, one of the best things that we can do for air quality is to not go outside when the air is bad and modulate our behavior. And that's something I think we don't necessarily notice very well. Not go run on the side of the highway is a place to start. But our infrastructure continues to increase in traffic volume, as we've all seen. And it's not getting better. And so there's progress. School buses, warehouse trucks are getting higher standards, regulatory standards that are making cleaner emissions. That's going to make a big difference. But if we add endless numbers of them because we want our packages right away, it's going to be a hard uphill battle for us. And so I'll get into what do we do about it. But the Allentown, Bethlehem, East Stroudsburg metro area ranked really poorly in the American Lung Association's report of communities, of the statistical metropolitan areas. We ranked 105th worst for high ozone days out of 228, 50th worst for 24-hour particle pollution out of 225. So there's 49 places we could go that are worse than us. We ranked 103 worst for annual particulate pollution. And so so both ozone is a risk and the particulate pollution here for us. And it's weirdly coming together, and summer can be a challenging time because you want to be outside, but you've got air pollution issues and extreme heat. And so if you have a house that has a climate control, you may be able to ignore this. Many, many people in many places do not. And so the extreme heat is a really poignant issue. We had record high heat temperatures here in Easton in June, extended heat waves breaking various records. And there's serious impacts to human health and safety. And we work closely with Northampton County Emergency Management Services, and their hazard mitigation officer said, we don't really know what to do about extreme heat because it's not been something that's been addressed consistently for a long period of time. Flooding, they know what they're doing. They know how to get out the flood boats and all, they know what they're supposed to do there. But he said, we're starting to get calls from individuals who are saying, I'm so hot and I have nowhere to go. And he said, I don't know where to tell you to go, or the mall while it's open, but you don't have a car. But the lady doesn't have a car, and she's calling me crying, and she's saying, is there a place someone can put me? And so when you start unraveling the extreme heat situation, there's really interesting things to know. And there's a great book for anyone who's interested called Palaces for the People, where a researcher studied the major heat wave that happened in Chicago a couple decades ago. We had extreme numbers of deaths. And he discovered that these were low-income neighborhoods, but some were very low income and some were just low income. Outcomes were not necessarily worse in the very low-income neighborhoods. In fact, in some cases, they were better. And they were better in the very low-income neighborhoods than the low-income neighborhoods because the communities were organized so that people checked on one another. And they knew if the elderly were alone or trapped in their apartments, and they took care of one another. And the communities were organized so you actually saw one another going to the store. So the slightly better off communities lived more independently, like we do in suburban neighborhoods, where we go to work and we go home to our car, and we pull into our driveway and we go into our house, and we don't need anybody else. This creates really high risk for people who don't get noticed for suffering, and extreme heat becomes the invisible way that people die. A number of years ago, I'm on a committee with the American Meteorological Society, and we were discussing that there was a huge heat wave in Portland, Oregon, and 200 people died. And there was almost no media coverage of this because there was no dramatic footage of the people dying. They died alone in their homes, in heat, right? If 200 people died in a flood in New York City, well, this would be the only thing you saw on TV because there'd be dramatic footage of cars and waters rising and all this kind of stuff, right? So how do you, and it's the media market, so how do you draw attention to these invisible risks? So the air quality that people are silently suffering from, all kinds of cardiovascular risks, hospitals popping up all over the place and medical clinics everywhere, and extreme heat and the discomfort that comes with it. These are serious issues that I think our community needs to be grappling with that are not always on the top of our minds and don't get kind of the excitement of coverage that flood does. So especially if you look at cities like Easton, my home on High Street on College Hill is a perfectly lovely home, but it's not got air conditioning. Almost none of them do. And putting air conditioning in is very, very hard, right? And you go to, most of the properties have not been built with air conditioning, and so it becomes very challenging. So there's an increasing demand for cooling centers and locations across the Lehigh Valley, and I think long-term we need to think differently even than that, because it's one thing to go to a place and get a cup of ice and sit and cool for a little while, but long-term, how do we really manage this? Extreme heat is responsible for more deaths in Pennsylvania than all other natural disasters combined, actually, as of 2004. You wouldn't think. You just wouldn't think that, right? And in fact, nationally, I believe now, extreme heat is the #1 natural hazard killer. Flooding was when I started my career, but extreme heat has advanced that. And we could exist here and never once hear about that, right? So it's a really interesting phenomenon. So here's the things that are happening up in the atmosphere and the air quality, but then there's the decisions that we're making on the ground that influence all of these and tie into them. And so I'm picking out two that are just high on my radar, and these are data centers and warehouses. So data centers are these large, huge warehouse-like facilities that are being filled with technology equipment, basically computers, not jobs, not humans really. These are, imagine rooms filled with computer servers, millions of square feet of them, and they are powering the technology that runs AI. So when we hit ChatGPT for something, and AI is being built into every web browser we have, every interaction we have, natural learning, language learning systems are appearing in all kinds of ways we're not even noticing anymore. But this AI technology and these large language models, they require a lot of computing energy. And so the Northeast region is one of the biggest places where these are being built, and now Northeast PA in particular is a place. Yeah.
Just think of the data centers that they're building as the cloud.
It's the cloud. It is the cloud. The cloud is not up there. It's down here. It's absolutely down here. Yeah, that's exactly what he just said. So the cloud has to exist somewhere. It's not really in the air doing nothing, the way that it feels. You send an email and it takes forever, and you're like, yeah, I had to go to China, I had to go there. Well, it goes through these data centers, right? And then, of course, warehouses. And we're all familiar with warehouses. And I've heard a few times recently, sadly, I feel like I'm delivering sad news, but it gets better, that the Lehigh Valley is becoming like the little inland empire. So the inland empire is that area out near Long Branch, California, where all of the shipping and manufacturing is, and it's a warehouse zoo. Well, positioned between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, the Lehigh Valley has lots of space, and we have been targeted by really sophisticated developers who do things like read municipal ordinances and find out where communities have weaknesses. And they have lawyers who can just look and say, well, there's no prohibition for our massive warehouse in this community. In Pennsylvania, all communities are required to zone for all uses. So even like Glendon and places that are this big in West Easton have to have zones that allow for all possible zoning uses, right? And so everybody's got to have a place where a warehouse could conceivably go. Now you can get around this with multi-municipal plans where you share uses, like if you've got two bordering, you can say warehouses, you take them and we'll take this, where you share and can plan a little bit better. But it's put municipalities who never saw mega warehouses on their radar at complete, caught blindsided. They didn't know, nobody saw this coming, and nobody asked for it. But the developers asked for it, and maybe perhaps we asked for it with our purchasing habits and such. And so these are two really serious risks. There are headlines everywhere. The most recent one, as I was putting this presentation together, I was like, okay, this is not good, but it's good. There's one right now. The first one is proposed in the Lehigh Valley, 2.6 million square feet, thankfully on an already developed site that was an Air Products site in Upper Macungie, is it? Hamilton Boulevard in Allentown, actually. Yeah. And so the stresses that come with these data centers in particular are their incredibly high energy use, electricity, and water supply. They use a lot of water and a lot of electricity. And so they threaten to drain the groundwater supplies from areas, and that's happening in other places. And PPL has just announced that it expects that its electricity demand will triple in the next 5 to 7 years. So I don't know the numbers anymore, but there was something like it took PPL 30 years to get from this level to this level. It's going to do that 3 times more in 5 to 7 years, driven in large part by these kinds of developments, warehouses, and particularly data centers. And so regulations coming out to demand that these centers figure out how to power themselves, because our utility companies simply can't keep up. They can't produce that much power that fast. So they're going to have to come up with renewable or on-site, generate their own electricity from their operations. But the risks to the water supply are real, and there's concerns about power brownouts, which becomes a bit of a risk. And of course, you've got more air pollution with any of one of these things and that sort of thing. For those of you who are interested, there is particularly a warehouse development at 13th Street Silk Mill in Easton that is proposed. There is an advocacy group that has gathered to try to prevent the development. And Nurture Nature Center is not an advocacy group, but I've asked for their permission to share this image. They did some renderings that show the scale and size of what this warehouse would actually look like, because the developers did not submit renderings like that with their plans to the city planning. So the advocacy group hired somebody to do this based on those drawings, and they have a whole website filled with before and after, so that you can see what that area where Pfizer used to be, essentially, that whole lot, what it did look like, what it does look like. It doesn't look good now, don't get me wrong, and what it would look like. So this is just a local example, perhaps a particularly egregious example of putting one right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Usually they're being put on the green fields. But the proliferation of these is really putting huge demand on our infrastructure for roads. So we're mad that Route 22 is perpetually under construction, but how can it not be? And the developers don't pay that, right? So this is it's a long-term interesting problem. There's a great group, if you're interested in thinking about these things, called Strong Towns. It's a national nonprofit that deals with these issues and articulates the problems really well, about how development patterns come in and stress local municipalities. And then, of course, we have the climate impacts. And I'm not going to give you a climate lecture. But essentially, we're looking at temperature change up. We're looking at precipitation change up. As of November 7, 2025, Allentown has had 24 days this year with temperatures made twice as likely by climate change. Allentown is the bigger region, so Climate Central gets their data, but this actually comes through NOAA to Climate Central. But the average annual temperatures in Allentown are 2.4 degrees warmer since 1970, and their annual precipitation has increased by 3.8 inches. And so the long-term projections look like temperature in Allentown in 2020 will be by 2060 more like weather in Arlington, Virginia. So our region will feel more like Arlington, Washington, D.C. temperatures, and projections that by 2100 it'll feel more like Little Rock does here in the Lehigh Valley. Wow. If you look at those, they expect the average summer high to be 8.6 degrees higher by 2100 based on the trends that are already documenting. So there's the 5th National Climate Assessment, which gives long-term ranges that current climate conditions are really unprecedented for thousands of years. They give examples of food system failure, and that's one I'm just going to spend a minute on. So how do we address them, and what do we do about it? Because what we do makes a really big difference. So some of this is kind of depressing. On the other hand, seeing what people are doing to make change is great, and lots of good things are happening. And so one of the things that is places that we feel these is in our agriculture community. So all of these systems are connected. So if we have extended high heat, we have extended flooding, we have all of these challenges and demands on our land use that are making property values high. Agriculture suffers in the Lehigh Valley. So we see our farmland being eaten up and turned into warehouses, but there's also the issue of the growers themselves trying to make a sustainable living and continue to produce food so that we don't have to ship our tomatoes from California. Why should we, right? We would like to prefer to eat locally because we get more nutrients, we have reduced truck traffic, and it keeps our own local economy. We'd probably rather buy from growers we can go visit and know. So these are really mission critical. So these issues feel abstract, but they really, really affect us here on the ground, and they're mission critical if we want to have a local food economy. And so there's major impacts to the local agricultural community, and Nurture Nature Center is the parent of Buy Fresh, Buy Local of the Greater Lehigh Valley, which works to strengthen the local food system, connect growers to consumers so that we can buy food. One of the issues is rising land prices. So the per acre price for farmland has increased 57% in Northampton County and 27% since the 2017 USDA agricultural census. So in 8 years, we have a 50% per acre land increase for this land, which means buying farms is very hard and selling them might be feeling more profitable. There's labor shortages and limited income from farm production traditionally, but the working conditions that we're describing with these hot days, the people are not wanting these jobs. There's very low salaries because the farms have not profit. So it's very hard to get workers, which leads to labor shortages, which makes the actual salaries that farmers are growing and the profits of local farms shockingly low in many cases. And there's an aging farm population as a result. So our Lehigh Valley farm population is almost exclusively white. I think as of the last count, there were 2 documented black farmers and only 5% non-white. And the age of the average farmer is quite high. I don't remember what it is, but it's somewhere like 58, 60 is the average farmer, with very few on the low end and lots more on the higher end. And so we're losing the population of farmers and growers that we have here. But women are taking a larger and larger percentage of that. So go us, that's cool. And so they're facing some of these big issues. So big heavy storms, more rainfall makes it harder to grow crops. Extreme weather events can decimate a whole crop in a short period of time. Wetter springs mean that they have to delay their field work. Warmer seasons do give longer growing periods sometimes, so there's some benefits. There's some places they can plant different crops because we're in a different growing zone now than we used to be. But there's lots of pressure from disease and risk. And so locally, farmers are adapting and doing better practices, and they're working really hard. They're removing their wettest and lowest fields from vegetable production, turning them into pasture. They are adding more grass strips to reduce erosion, adding riparian buffers, doing alley cropping with native plants to reduce erosion and absorb water, reducing their tillage. A lot of farmers are moving to no-till, which improves the soil and runoff, building more high tunnels for protection, extending tree planting, silvopasture, providing shade for their livestock to address the high heat because the livestock get really hot as well, and harvesting in the dark with headlamps to avoid the high heat. So you think about the food that you're eating, these lovely vegetables we're having, and imagine that the farmers are out there with headlamps because they're trying to do it at night because it's just too hot during the day. So on a positive note, our farmers are seeing significant improvement in their soil health due to these changes. So the changes we make a big difference, and we should be supporting them. If you're interested in this topic, there's a new report coming out, an updated Lehigh Valley Local Food Economy Report, which will be many chapters of detailed information about how our agriculture community is faring, and that will be released in January. Our team is putting it together now. We're doing lots of education programs on the connections between climate and agriculture, and something called regenerative agriculture, which is looking to restore nutrients back to the soil health and make our food more healthy, and adapt to some of these. So we have educational materials. We're funded through state programs to do education on these various topics. One of them is a program to educate youth and adults about how climate change affects what can be grown, and how conventional farming practices can contribute and how better practices can make it better. And we teach about all of the ways that this matters. We're also pursuing, we have a research study from USDA funded in a miracle of federal funding right now. We just got a grant to do a research feasibility study on a regional food hub. And a regional food hub would be a perhaps centralized, depending on the model that gets identified, facility operation that would allow local growers to have various benefits. So a central distribution hub. So if you want to send your tomatoes, you're a grower, you have tomatoes, you want to get them to restaurants, very difficult. But a food hub would allow all the growers to bring their centralized food to a place, and then restaurants could call up and say, hey, I want 30 batches of tomatoes, and they ship them out, right? So you figure the local growing operation is often a farmer and his wife and something, and so they're driving it in a truck. It's not a big operation. A hub would add tremendous capacity to our local food capacity, and it would also could have a value-added thing where they could turn their tomatoes into red sauce, and then you could buy red sauce, and then you could have your local farm's marinara sauce, pack, and they could earn more money. So we're looking for ways to create a business model for a food hub, and these exist all throughout the country and other places, successfully and less successfully, and that's what we're studying, to help create an infrastructure that would support our local farms. And I think it's really important. It ties into climate, it ties into our ability to feed ourselves. It preserves farmland so that we have some left. It reduces food waste. It's sustainable, climate friendly. When you go to the hospital, you can get local food instead of whatever they feed you at the hospitals, and the hospitals are trying to do a lot more of that now. They're trying to really recognize that what you eat while you're recovering matters, and lowers transportation emissions. So it's all really a big cycle. Nurture Nature Center also does climate action planning, which helps communities to assess their risks, their vulnerabilities, their contributions, and figure out how to adapt to the change that's likely to come. So we have drafted Easton's climate action plan. We just found out we are going to be helping Allentown with its draft one for Allentown as well. And if you want to read the climate action plan, it's available online, and it details the vision and objectives. And I'll just tell you, number one is make the city of Easton a leader in climate actions. And Easton's leadership is really working in this regard. Sourcing clean and local energy from the sun or wind, transforming buildings into energy efficient, sustainable places to live, work, and play, and making sure that the benefits of climate active are equitably distributed across all the residents and not just some of them. We're trying to move toward a more walkable, bikeable community with smart transportation programs, and deal with these extreme hazards and risks at the same time that we're talking about. So we're working closely with the city. They've hired a really great sustainability director. Recently just got a score of an A- on our annual climate action strategy, which is part of an international consortium. And so Easton's moved from a C all the way up to an A-, and very few communities rate this high. So good things are happening. If you haven't met Brandon Sullivan, he's the new Easton Sustainability Coordinator, and this kid is on fire, doing all kinds of things to address everything I just told you about, and doing a really great job of it. So we have action in place. The city's putting LED light bulbs in everywhere, moving to a dark sky program, which is a movement that's trying to get light pollution out of our cities so that we can see the stars and balance that with public safety. Not easy, but really important for supporting energy emissions, local habitats, and making life comfortable here. This city is pursuing a council of governments just for environmental issues to get local governments thinking about this together. And we've done a lot of programming through our Create Resilience programming through NOAA, getting out materials and education in 1,000 different ways over the past 10 years, podcasts, educational materials, youth climate summits annually, and we'll have another one this year at Northampton Community College while we're closed. And it leaves some big questions ahead of us about whether we're prepared for a big event like happened in Asheville and Easton, and in Texas. Is Forks Township prepared? Is Easton prepared? Is it planning in the right ways to be ready for that? How are we preparing for heat waves? How are our development patterns contributing to them? Are we protecting residents in the ways that we are building and developing? How are we communicating about these issues to our residents? And how are we warning people when these events are happening? And for all of us, how are our individual patterns of behavior contributing to these? And there's a million things that you can do, and this is the right group because you're already caring. Attending local township meetings, using any communication mechanisms that you have, joining local environmental councils if your townships have them, buy local food. Come on, why not? We have a Lehigh Valley Sustainable Business Network where we're trying to get businesses to do this. I mentioned the Watershed Friendly Certification Program, trying to get homeowners to keep their properties in ways that support all of these issues at the same time. And what's exciting is we are currently closed because we're expanding our facility to add in the back of our building a 75-seat immersive dome theater. And so you think planetarium, but I'm not supposed to say that word, because it's like that. It'll do space programs, but also Earth programs, also cultural programs. We can make you feel like you're underwater or on the desert or in outer space. It's incredible technology, and it's going to be a huge economic development driver, I think, for the Lehigh Valley, attract a lot more attention to our center, build a sustainability, diversify our funding and revenue streams a little bit, and help us to support our mission as that we're doing, trying to tackle all of these issues at the same time and get people to come in. It is going to open in 2027. It's funded through a federal grant and matched by Nurture Nature Foundation, which owns our building. And there's the seating, but the sky visuals that you can see is really Earth Sky live cultural programming. We say from backyard puddles to galactic devouring black holes, we'll be able to show you. So thank you. We did launch a membership program recently. We have Kim Kometz here. She's our development director and is helping us as we go forward, trying to figure out how to grapple with all of these local issues and the national work and deal with our all of the scales of work that we have. The chance to talk to you all is really wonderful. So thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know how old you were. You remember the World Cox Island
Yes.
Dam?
Yes.
That was supposed to solve all the flooding problems in the Lehigh Valley. That dam, but a little snail stopped it. Am I correct?
That was a really heated environmental
That's what
debate.
I mean. When I think of the millions of dollars that were spent and ruined for homes and places in the area that was never built, I'm just wondering what your comments would be on that.
Okay, so I'm not an expert in what happened in Cox Island Dam, but here's what I'm going to say. When we started Nurture Nature Center, we started because it flooded, because Easton flooded.
Right.
And we were trying to educate about flooding. And all up and down the rivers and towns far and wide were signs that said, "Governor, stop the flooding," right? And everybody was mad, right? And the governor can't stop flooding, right? So what they were talking about is how we manage dams in New York City that were drinking water dams that have a very incidental effect on flooding, very incidental effect, way less than people anticipated. And I understand, and it was important that the Delaware River Basin Commission look at how they managed those dams. But the reality is, if your property is next to the river, a river is designed to flood. And there's a great science professor at Lehigh University who refers to the floodplains as, he says, this all belongs to the river. It's all hers. These arms, so they are formed by previous floods. Floodplains are formed by previous flooding. That's why they're flat, because the water rose up and flattened out the land next to them, right? And so we have to come to understand that the earth has claimed this land first. We came on it second, and we make it a hazard when we occupy it. So really, there isn't a flood hazard. Floods are not a hazard where there are not humans. It doesn't matter. They can flood all day long. It's when we stick ourselves right in the path that we become culpable. And so there are lots of dam projects across the country that have reduced downstream flooding, and yet the Army Corps of Engineers has come to us and said, and it did when we were founding, saying, so we can communicate we can build a dam, but we can't tell people behind the dam and the levee how high risk they are, because it's made the likelihood of more frequent nuisance flooding downstream a lot less likely. It's made the potential for a catastrophic failure flood that kills millions way more likely. So they're very complex issues. They end up being, I had first opinions, and then as I study them more, I go, gosh, well, I didn't understand all that. So I think we need to move toward less reliance on, okay, I'm going to get kicked out of my own organization for this. Science and technology to get us out of all of our problems, and look at a lot at our community planning and development patterns, right? And then take some responsibility for where we're putting ourselves and how we're interacting. And because we keep relying on it. There's kind of a feeling like scientists are going to come save us from our last bad decision, and they keep doing it. But we get to a point where I think we have to do that. So I'll go study Tox Island Dam more to study more on that particular case. I was a little too early for it, exactly. But yeah, those are interesting questions about species survival. Yeah, and there's great reading. I studied a lot of that in my program.
Increase in rainfall becoming a factor. How does that equate as far as precipitation during the winter? Are we going to be seeing more snow?
Not necessarily, but we could. It seems to be the pattern has been a less snowfall trend for us and more precipitation in what they call the liquid precipitation. They call it wet and dry in the Weather Service. So they tell us that on some of our projects we're only allowed to deal with wet precipitation, and I'm like, what do you mean? What other kind is there? But I guess dry is snow. So we haven't been seeing that trend, and I think it's more likely in the rainfall events. But you're raising a good point that Easton, one of the other floods that did happen was in 1996, was a snow ice jam flood that was pretty bad. We have the pictures of that on our wall. And we are, I think, woefully unprepared for that to happen because we only think of it in the spring.
We're avid skiers, and since we go through the mountain a lot, we're finding that they're making more
snow. Yep.
And there is natural stuff to ski on.
We haven't had good snowfall in years. No, yeah.
And one other thing is flood insurance for flooding along rivers and plains. The biggest problem we've got in this country is we'll charge you flood insurance, and your house floods, we'll pay you, and you can build another house in the same place.
Yes, you can.
And
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I was actually filming with for an educational video we did down in Monmouth County somewhere, I'm forgetting the name, with an emergency manager on the beach. Sandy had just been through, we did a study in Sandy, and we were sharing our results through a video, and so I'm interviewing this emergency manager, and this beach house that's right on the beach. I mean, it's right on the beach. They've got, laborers up there banging with it, and I said to the guy, what are they doing? And he said, well, they're putting it back together. But they weren't modifying it at all, and I was like, but he said, oh, it doesn't matter. He said, the structure means nothing. He said, they'll keep rebuilding it. The location is worth so much money. They'll just keep rebuilding that over and over because the structure is worth just a fraction of what the value of that is. And so you're right. There's really major challenges with the National Flood Insurance Program. One of the interesting things is without it, the federal government has no mechanism to make us regulate our floodplains at all. That's why it exists. Because to participate, so Easton is a floodplain community, NFIP community, so is Forks Township. You have to be in order to get federally backed flood insurance, which until recently was the only kind you could get. Only Lloyd's of London sold private flood insurance. Now more people are getting into the market because the National Flood Insurance Program is so far in debt it'll never crawl its way back out because of Katrina and all of those storms. But so if you accept becoming part of NFIP, then you can offer flood insurance to your residents, and then you can get it, and Connie Churchman, whoever she is, she can get it. She can get flood insurance. But in order to be an NFIP community, you must do at least these basic minimum floodplain management things. So you can't let people do really bad floodplain development. You have to hit this minimum bar. If you don't want to be in a National Floodplain Insurance Program community, Easton could opt out. Its residents would go nuts, but it could opt out, and then we could allow any kind of building we want in a floodplain, which is really interesting. And it was designed to be a floodplain regulation program, not an insurance program, but it ended up being all insurance.
Thank you very
Great, thank you. Thank you. I'm good to be here.